Seeing none, we're going to move on to section G, resolution presented by board members. Tonight we have two, so we'll do one at a time. Number one, I believe, is Mr. McIntyre's. Mr. McIntyre, are you able to read this one, or do you need me to?
If you could read that for me, Brian, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay. So number one is Equity Director. Whereas the Gateway School District is committed to equity as it is essential in fulfilling the mission statement of the district. And whereas the well-established achievement gap is one of many hurdles on the path to equity. And whereas the current pandemic has had a profound effect on the achievement of all Gateway students, it is our obligation to ensure that the gains made in recent years towards closing the achievement gap are not lost, or worse, that the gap widens as a result of the pandemic. Therefore, let it be resolved on this 19th day of May of 2021 that the Gateway Board of School Directors directs the Superintendent's Office to create a full-time Equity Director position within central administration and hire a qualified candidate to a 4-year contract. Do you have any questions or comments on number one?
Sure.
Yes.
So Rick, is this coming from you, or is this an administrative recommendation?
This is a board member resolution.
Okay. Have you been in discussions with administration about this position?
Multiple times over the last 5 years, yes.
Okay, but at this time, administration is not recommending this position, just to be clear for the public.
I think that would be a question for administration.
Okay, is administration recommending this position right now, Bill? Dr.
At
Short?
this time, we would not be recommending that position. We do have staffing upcoming at a budget meeting. That is when we would be evaluating any potential hires or additional positions.
So we have an upcoming staffing meeting when?
We do on June
1st. June 1st.
Right here at the LGI at 6 o'clock.
And you'll be sharing at that time administration's recommendations and
Administrative
budgeting.
recommendations for the 2021-22 school year with positions that would be added with the use of the ESSER's money, and also reflecting the needs of staffing as far as student interest and schedules.
Do we have a job description for the public for this position, or salary?
We do not at this time. We've had some previous job descriptions with the equity director hired several years ago that we could reference if needed.
And maybe this question goes back to Mr. McIntyre. I don't know. Can you identify any current deficiencies in our program that are requiring you to make this change?
No.
Can you explain
as
how?
As far as performance by our administration, absolutely not.
So you're saying publicly our administration is doing a good job?
Yes.
Can you explain how a full-time administrator will then solve a problem that you have not actually identified?
Well, I think the problem is laid out in the resolution. The problem still exists. The problem is the opportunity gap. And while I absolutely applaud our administration, Dr. Chakey in particular, for his efforts over the last several years in working with equity and improving our performance in relation to the opportunity gap, I believe there's still a lot of improvement to be made. I think Dr. Short would agree that we still have a long way to go. And I believe that Dr. Chakey and the equity committee and all of the faculty and staff and the principals and everybody that's been a part of our efforts in reducing the opportunity gap have laid a fantastic groundwork. I think we have good systems in place, and I believe that we've set it up to where if we have a full-time equity director come in, and that's his sole focus is to run that ship and to make sure that all things are going through the lens of equity, I believe we can do even better than we are currently doing.
Do you have any examples of school districts that you can put forth that would give evidence that a full-time equity director has indeed closed the opportunity gap?
I don't have that data in front of me now.
Okay. Do you have any evidence that that would be remedied in the 4 years that you're putting on to this position?
I mean, 4 years is, I would believe, a starting point. I believe we can make enough gains and gain enough ground there to go back to being a self-sustaining program. Given we hire the proper equity director, I think we can make a tremendous amount of progress in 4 years with somebody solely focused on that project.
So are you basing a 4-year contract then on another school's contract, or how did you come up with a 4-year? Is that more of just a contractual decision?
It's more of I don't like as you know, we don't like to forecast budgets and contracts too far into the future. I think at the end of that 4 years, whoever the makeup of the board is at that time would have the decision to make to continue the relationship with that equity director, or decide that it's no longer needed, or that it's no longer viable.
How many complaints have there been this year from students or families that they were not adequately handled in regards to equity?
I don't know if I would have that. I mean, I don't get every complaint that comes to the district. I don't believe you either. You do either.
Dr. Chapin,
I do know that I've had a number of parents reach out to me, and I believe Mrs. Delaney can speak on that as well.
Dr. Chakey or Dr. Short, do we have any complaints that have been unaddressed in regards to our equity this year?
No, I think the way that we have it set up is, with the GSD Equity Committee, a lot of the members, well, all of the members are within the schools. So they hear information from the ground floor there, whether it's an issue within the community or whether it's a parental issue, and they'll bring it to the committee and we make sure that it gets resolved in a timely manner.
And do you set annual goals for your committee?
Yes.
Have you evaluated those goals this year yet? I mean, we're not quite to the end and it's been a tough year.
Yeah, as part of the equity policy, at the end of the year, we'll make a presentation on some of the goals throughout the year.
And how you've done with those. And that'll be at the end of the school year?
End of the school year.
All right. When's the last time that we were able to actually evaluate the school performance of our students? All of them? Without the...
You really have to go back almost 2 years ago with some test data that was distributed through the Department of Education. Due to COVID and the shutdown, of course, they waived the exam last year. They are administering the test this year, PSSA and Keystone. However, there remains several options that parents have taken advantage of with opt-outs due to online or gate programming. So I would be comfortable saying that it could be another 2 years, maybe 3, until we have data that reflects where we were as far as being on cycle every year to evaluate and determine the needs moving forward with children.
Did you just say you don't actually think we'll be able to evaluate our students' performance for 2 to 3 years?
We anticipate some data next year, but it doesn't provide us with the full picture, understanding that there has been that learning loss. So the state recognizes that. But then recently, there has been an article and some information about the Pennsylvania Senate putting together, I believe, a bill that would allow parents to hold their child back. And just receiving information about that and hearing about it at the IU level, there's a lot of questions, more questions than answers at this point concerning that. So that's another issue that could impact state testing and data and scores.
All right. I guess the last question then I have, Mr. McIntyre, would be, for transparency's sake, why hasn't the community been afforded the answers to all of the questions I just asked before voting on this next week and agreeing to spend $500,000 in salaries and benefits before we even have our discussion on social workers, counselors, at our June 1st budget and personnel meeting.
I think we just answered the questions you asked. If I'm not mistaken. If you have more, I'm more than happy to try and answer.
The community doesn't have a job description. It doesn't have any data showing how this position is going to improve. It doesn't have any goals. We have no data of our students currently, how they're performing to even know if there's deficiencies. You can't identify any deficiencies in the current program, but you're asking me as a board member to vote next week on a position that's going to cost the school district and the taxpayers $500,000 in salaries and benefits.
I don't know where you're getting $500,000 from, but that may be right, that may not be right, but
Well,
the vote next week with the vote next week would spend exactly $0 of taxpayer money. The vote to actually spend the money would come later when we have a candidate presented.
So how do you actually approve a position and then say it doesn't cost any money?
I didn't say that. I said the vote next week will spend no money. The
Well,
vote to spend money comes later when we have the qualified candidate.
technically, but if we vote to hire a person, I think there's an assumption that there's going to be a cost
We're
associated
not voting
with
to
that.
hire a person. We're voting to direct the superintendent's office to recommend a hire. We actually vote on the hire later.
So
In
you're-
the meantime,
you're voting to tell
the
Bill to
purpose
recommend something he
of this
hasn't recommended.
resolution, the purpose of this resolution is to direct our administration to formulate the job description, seek out qualified candidates, and present somebody to the board for approval. We do not have a finalized job description for this resolution as of yet, but as we discussed earlier, we do have a pretty solid template from a previous board approved resolution to hire a full-time equity director. And I believe, I'm confident that given enough time, we can get the job description in place with board input, find a qualified candidate, decide on a salary, and hire them and get them in, hopefully before the beginning of the next school year.
I would say if that's your intent, Mr. McIntyre, that we should be voting on this at that time when we have the job description, when we have the recommendations from the administrators, and when we have the salary requirements. When I was on
We will be.
committee 6 years ago, this position was proposed 6 years ago at $125,000 salary per year plus salaries and benefits. And that was 6 years ago. That's where I'm getting, you asked how I got $500,000. That's where I got my $500,000 estimate. Because 6 years ago, it was suggested that we hire a full-time equity director at $125,000 per year.
As a cap, yes. And I believe we ended up spending $30,000 a year on that.
Right.
Because the board voted on the actual money when it was time to do the hiring.
At the time, we hired a part-time equity director. Is it still true that there's an equity
Correct.
director going to be available to us, Dr. Short, through the AIU?
That is correct. They recently hired an equity director to oversee the development of equity programs throughout Allegheny County and the IU.
And is it common for school districts to have combined positions like we do at Gateway, where an assistant superintendent also serves as an equity director? Or do you know of any other schools that have full-time equity directors, like how big they are?
The only school districts that I'm aware of that are much larger than us, that would be Philadelphia Public School System, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg. Larger school districts tend to have someone full-time within their departments.
By larger, how big is Philadelphia School District?
Could be 15, 20,000 students
I think it's a couple 100,000.
or more.
Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, I think, are around 15. What about the AIU equity director? Will there be a fee for us to use that person?
No,
Is it covered in the fee that we already pay the AIU?
yes.
You have any idea like how many hours that person could work for us, or is that kind of to be determined still?
It's basically a call. I mean, if we need advice, need input, information, they're available.
Is that someone that could actually come to the district and attend meetings with our staff or do trainings as
They
well?
already have
They've already been here? Okay.
attended meetings.
Bill, how many districts are in the AIU?
I want to say 42.
Thank you.
I'm finished.
All right, yes, Ms. Ritter.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. You're able to hear me okay, Rick?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm sorry. I have to keep unmuting and muting.
Okay, I'll just go on for a little while here and then you can unmute and kick back some responses. So the proposition here is, it says, whereas the Gateway School District is committed to equity as it is essential in fulfilling the mission statement of the district. So one of the propositions is that we need to be committed to equity as it is essential. I've got the mission statement here and it has 6 extraneous double spaces in it. I say that because I'm quite picky with words. So it says the mission statement of the Gateway School District, in cooperation with the parents and other members of the community, is to provide quality education opportunities. And it doesn't say it's to provide quality educational equity. So it uses the word opportunities, is to provide quality educational opportunities for all students, to promote academic excellence in a safe and caring environment, to enhance self-confidence through personal responsibility, and develop lifelong learners who will be productive citizens in a diverse and changing world. So one of the goals is to provide quality educational opportunities. However, your proposition says the Gateway School District is committed to equity. I don't know that it's committed to equity. I think equity is an ingredient, but I don't know what equity means. And what I mean by that is I think it's opportunity. So it's the next section of your proposition is, and whereas the well-established achievement gap is one of the many hurdles in the path to equity. So, and then you go on to say, and whereas the current pandemic has had a profound effect on the achievement of all Gateway students. So you're making 3 propositions in order to make a summation and to propose an equity director here. But you use the word equity, achievement gap, and achievement gap, and then you go on to say, it's our obligation to ensure the gains made in recent years towards closing the achievement gap are not lost, or worse, that the gap widens as the result of the pandemic. However, one of the profound effects on the achievement is that some students have performed better at home, and some students have performed the same, and some students have performed worse. So I contend with one of your propositions that it has a profound effect on the achievement of Gateway students. So what I'm saying is, this is not a well-formed set of propositions. The other is, when Mrs. Cerrucci was questioning you about a few things, you said the problem is the opportunity gap 3 times. The problem is the opportunity gap, the opportunity gap. And yet your statement here uses the words achievement gap 3 times. So what is it? Is it an achievement gap, or is it an opportunity gap? Is it an achievement gap, or is it an opportunity gap? Is equity involved with opportunity or achievement? In other words, since you haven't settled on the definition of these terms, I am unable to know whether I am in favor, neutral, or opposed to the creation of an equity director. So you see my conundrum here. Now, there was an achievement gap committee that was formed a few years ago, and I had some questions about that, and I emptied a red pen asking many of these same questions in this book that I brought many times to these board meetings. And none of the board members have yet to take the time to look at the questions I have regarding the definition of achievement gap versus opportunity gap. So how can I, in good conscience as a board member, vote either for, against, or abstain on a word that has not yet been well defined? Now, many people have attempted to define it for themselves, and they believe that they are clear in their minds, but I am not them, I am me. It needs to be clear to me. So those are the concerns that I have with this. Now, if you're asking the question, do the students need some help? If we use a term like that, I would say definitely yes. I would say I would be in favor of creating a student excellence framework position that might include and help assist Drs. Chakey, Dr. Rossi, and Dr. Short in trying to make Gateway a place of excellence for all the students and grant them as many opportunities as we can possibly do. So I'm in favor of that, but to create an equity director position, I don't know what, I'm not trying to be obstinate on this. I truly, in my conscience, don't understand what those words mean. And even the people who explain it to me confuse the term equity and opportunity in their speech. So I think they're not clear in what they're asserting. Now, I understand that people will be angry at me for this and prefer that I just listen more, but I am not one who does not listen. I listen very, very intently, and I take notes on everything. So I'm trying to be as clear as I can to say, I don't understand this. So how can I, in good conscience, support it? So those are my questions, Rick. And that's not to say that I don't appreciate your effort and all the efforts of the school board members and all the teachers and the parents to do bend over backwards with taxes and, doing everything they can to try to help every kid in every situation. I'm not disavowing that or not acknowledging that. I'm saying we are doing some things well, and we need to sustain that and pat ourselves on the back and continue to do that and excel at it. Not to say that we're failing at it when we're not truly failing. I think we're making good progress. How am I wrong? I think you're doing a good job, Rick. How am I wrong? I want to perfect the way that we all behave towards each other and towards the teachers here and say that they're doing a very, very good job, and how can we do better? So that's the tenor that I'm trying to bring to this discussion here. So please don't think that I'm being antagonistic. I'm being confused.
John, I don't take any of your questions or comments as antagonistic. I don't know if people are going to be mad at you for anything you've said. I certainly am not. And I will speak in defense of you. I believe your questions are coming from the purest of places. I think you're genuinely just trying to educate yourself on the subject. And I applaud you for doing that, knowing that you're going to possibly get backlash for doing it. So I applaud you for that, John. If I can go back to what you started with, was the beginning of my resolution in reference to the trying to think of the word, the mission statement of the district. Again, it's about, if you could read the first part of the mission statement again.
Sure. The mission of the Gateway School District, in cooperation with parents and other members of the community, is to provide quality educational opportunities for X, Y, and Z.
And that section of it ends with for all students.
Bingo. Yeah, for all students. Right.
That is where the term equity becomes essential to achieving that mission statement and fulfilling that mission statement, I should say.
Very good.
If all of these students aren't getting the same opportunities at the start, then we are not fulfilling our duties to fulfill that mission statement. As far as my use of the word achievement gap versus opportunity gap, I do apologize for that confusion and the wordplay, if you will. My familiarity with the subject, as I'm sure yours was, with the achievement gap committee and everything, the achievement gap was the phrase being used. It's still essentially the same problem from the same data sets. However, the preferred terminology, as Mrs. Delaney pointed out to me recently, is opportunity gap. And I believe the reason for that change is it changes the lens. The focus isn't necessarily on the end result is the achievement. But maybe by then it's too late. We need to look at the start, which is the opportunity.
Right. The actual report, the first 2/3 of the book talks about the achievement gap. The last 1/3 of the set of documents talks about the opportunity gap. So even the report itself uses both sets of terms.
I understand. And like I said, I've been using the term achievement gap. I was instructed that the terminology now is opportunity gap. So I'm just trying to correct my language when discussing the terminology to what is the current usage.
Very good.
Can I interject in there, Rick, just to kind of
Please do. I was hoping you would.
several equity, as we want to call it, equity meetings and all with University of Pitt, who has been doing a phenomenal job in terms of their, what we call DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason that term became opportunity gap as opposed to achievement gap, because they were looking at particularly a lot of the individual families, a lot of the ones that did not get sometimes the same start, whether it's a preschool start, parents could not afford it, parents were working. So many kids started out already behind. They didn't have the same opportunities. And when you don't have the same opportunities, then, as you say, that would lead to, therefore, the achievement gap. So that's why I think they started changing the terminology, because they started to look at all the variables which cause that particular gap, whether it's achievement or opportunity, but that was a gap there. And it shouldn't be, because we want to look at excellence for all Gateway students. And we can't do that if we have some that are lagging behind. So what opportunities can we offer them so that they can be achieving at the same excellent level of other students? And as Dr. Short said, you know, we've addressed a lot of the times the transient cases of students coming in and out from other districts where they were already behind. And that's where we wanted to continue to focus on, and to do that so that we don't have some students that just don't meet up to where everyone else is, because it only pulls the district down. That's been proven data that when you have all your students excelling, your district as a whole is going to excel.
You said that really, really, you should consider being a teacher. Really clear. I say that for people that don't know. She is a teacher. Thank you.
Mr. Gallagher.
Also, I wanted to thank Mr. River for instructions and Mr. Ritchie. To answer some of those, prior to my being on the board, I met with you at Panera to go through the book and try to help answer some of those questions. So, although it's true that a board member hasn't done that, prior to that, we met and had a conversation. I also want to refer us back to August 18th, 2020, when we approved our equity policy. And I do believe this was a unanimous vote. The Gateway School Board declares it to be the policy of our district to ensure that all students are provided with an opportunity to fully maximize their overall potential through engagement of all aspects of the school district's educational programming. Specifically, the Gateway School Board acknowledges that our students, their families, and friends may have experienced discrimination in its many forms. The board believes that each and every student matters, and that the educational outcomes should never be predictable by any individual's actual or perceived physical characteristics. This is why I'm getting new glasses. The board will remain committed to ensuring that all staff will be culturally proficient, embrace the concept of educational equity, and consistently work towards eliminating the racial achievement gap. And then it continues on with how we're going to do that and the expectations for doing that. So I do believe that in this particular resolution, we're speaking directly to policy 802 that was approved August 18th, 2020, and attaches it to the mission statement of the district. And I think that sometimes with any organization, we can approve policies, set things, and then lose sight of our commitment. Notice how many times in that policy that we all approved said the board would do this. The board would do this to ensure that this is happening. So I just refer us back to that as we're taking this under consideration. So that's just, yeah, I think that the tie that Mr. McIntyre had, the mission statement and our commitment to equity. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. But.
Can I just clarify? I don't want anybody to think that because I may not support a full-time equity director, that I don't support the policy. And that's a big problem, that nobody should think that any of us don't agree. I agree with everything Susan said. I agree with everything you said about kids who don't have preschool, don't have the same opportunities as kids who did, and therefore their achievement suffers. That was beautifully stated. I agree with everything you said. Wholeheartedly agree with our equity policy. What we're asking you to do is prove that a full-time equity director is going to change that versus the current program we have with an equity team. So please don't assume or think, anybody out there who's listening, that because we're questioning the full-time position of a $125,000 administrator does not mean that we don't support the equity policy. I just want to go on record as saying I fully support that equity policy that you just read.
I apologize if I was just answering John's question, the connection to
But
the
it's
resolution.
easy for people to get off track.
Right,
Just like when
yeah.
Rick said, he's going to take backlash for asking questions. Why? Why should anybody in this room take any questions or backlash for asking questions about justifying this position and having data and facts to back up why we're making a change and why you want the position? Nobody should have backlash for that.
Right.
It should be honest and open discussion. And Reverend Gallagher one time said something very wise to me. You said, we all want what's in the best interest of our students. We just often have different views on how we get there.
And I think the backlash often comes from lack of understanding. And that's, as you said, everyone has different opinions, but we do all want the best for the students. And we should not take it personally if we do get backlash.
Dr. Chakey, out of curiosity, when you have your meetings, your discussions, is there any once that the equity committee is not receiving? Are things being addressed as what you're looking into, what they're, what's being done?
I can't say with 100% certainty that everything that people have brought up that we've done, but we have made a lot of progress. I mean, as far as I know, most of the things that have been brought up recently, we've instilled within the district. We want to listen to committee members because each school is unique within the district. There's different issues, different things that are causing a dynamic in each school. So we take the information from teachers and from people that are within the school, and we do our best to make sure that we take care of any issue immediately.
Thank you.
And can I add, and I know I've said this and stated it more than one time, what efforts are being made to increase the number of African-American students in AIM programs and AP programs, and what efforts are being made to increase the numbers of African-American teachers in our Gateway School District.
We constantly discuss child find incidents and wanting to evaluate students for whatever programs that can be afforded to them. As far as the AP and honors track, there has been a concerted effort. In our high school, I do know that our counselors have been very attentive to the needs of the children, trying to encourage them to always take advantage of our strong honors and AP courses. And when doing so, to also take the exam, because I think that's important as well. Not just to be in the course, but also to follow through with the opportunity to take the test. As far as hiring practices, it's something that the district and I know Mrs. Crump, we talked about internally that it's difficult for the district to go out and necessarily say that we're looking for an individual to hire, because we do know that there are certain legalities surrounding that. But we always maintain that the best educator, the best teacher, doesn't necessarily have to be that individual that's a 4.2 average coming out of college or university. We do know that there is a science and there's an art to teaching. You have to be able to connect with students. You have to be able to ensure that they trust you as an educator. And once you have that, regardless of color, education can happen. I do agree with you that it is important for all of our children to at least see someone that reflects themselves in the building, in those opportunities as instructors or administrators, so that they do know that it is equitable and inclusive for everyone.
All right. Do we have any other questions on number 1?
I think, had a few unfielded questions or unanswered questions from Mr. Ritter, if I'm not mistaken. John, you touched on the third section of my resolution, dealing with the profound effect on the achievement of all Gateway students. And while, as we established today, we don't have good, solid data, I would ask Dr. Short, is it safe to assume that we have significant learning loss as a result of the effects of the pandemic?
I would be comfortable in saying that we do have learning loss. To use the word significant, I'm not sure that we have that data yet.
I think that's fair.
We will be able to have concrete data, what we anticipate at the start of the next school year, when we effectively diagnostically test our kids.
In looking at that and not knowing what that loss is, I'm of the opinion of, or of the practice of plan for the worst and hope for the best type of a thing. So I think, moving forward, I think the three of you would agree that we have to account for, a significant, or however you want to qualify it, but some level of learning loss. And we're kind of flying a little bit blind without, some of the data to assess it right away. So I guess my point is, we have to try to account for the worst and account for, a decent amount of learning loss and be able to recover that as quickly as possible.
I'm just going to add that I believe this summer we're planning on summer classes, Gatorade, whatever we're doing to try to help the learning loss these kids have endured. Am I correct in stating that?
That is correct.
And Mr. Chakey, would you say that equity is an important element of that summer program?
I think equity is an important element of any learning. So definitely.
So Rick,
I think I agree. I definitely agree with that.
So based on your plan for the worst, hope for the best comment, is that what you're saying is why you're putting the position on the agenda now?
That is part of the reason for putting it on the agenda, yes.
So
timing wise,
I could make a motion today then to hire 5 social workers and 2 counselors too, because I want to hope for the best but plan for the worst.
You're free to make any resolution you wish. You are a board member. My reason for putting it on now, I originally had this on the agenda for last month. And my reasoning behind trying to get this done early rather than later is to give our administration as much time as possible to formulate a good and coherent and effective job description, and to be able to exhaust all resources in finding a qualified candidate in a timely fashion, with the hopes of getting somebody hired for the beginning of the next school year.
I think that's what our budget and staffing meeting's for, June 1st.
Yeah, and again, we're not hiring somebody tonight. We're creating a position. We are creating a job description to search for a candidate to recommend to the board to then make the decision to hire. I believe that if we look at the previous job description, we can build upon that. I think if we look at other districts, maybe not around us, but certainly around the country, there are districts that have full-time equity directors. Keep in mind, when we hired a part-time equity director, nobody or equity consultant, nobody around us had that either. But I believe that in the time, between the 19th and the beginning of the school year, that our administration can accomplish that and have a candidate with a salary, set forth, and have that opportunity to have it presented at a study session for discussion, and then an actual regular meeting to vote on the expenditure. I believe, I understand the argument about the staffing and budget meeting and the timing. I'm of the opinion that it's better to have, I think Reverend Gallagher probably said this better than I will, but to have that money accounted for before the budget. It's easier to account for it than it is to add it later. So I think it would benefit us to have this resolution either voted up or down before that budget meeting. If it's voted down, they know they don't have to account for it in the budget. If we vote it up, then they do. And they can build that into the budget meeting.
For me personally, I'd like to wait to see what their staffing recommendations are, but I do have a question on social workers. We have 2 in the district, and we have how many students? 3,300. So we basically have 1 social worker for every 1,500 students, roughly, right? What's the state recommend for social workers per student? I know it's general, it doesn't apply to every district, but they kind of give a guide, right?
Well, they give a guide, and what's been brought up before, we're making references to the state recommendations, but this is from back in 2018, October 2018, we had to fill out a survey. And then this is coming out of Act 44. And part of the survey, it went through and it talked about the different all hazards planning, and Act 44 created a school safety committee for the state. And in anticipation of them supporting each school, they sent out a survey to each district. And we had to complete this survey. And what's been referenced is one of the questions says, how is your district as far as meeting the recommendations from the federal guidelines or the federal standards for social workers? And it lists a couple positions. It first lists school psychologists, and it mentions that you should have X amount of school psychologists for students. It also goes through nurses, also goes through counselors, and with social workers. Now, according to the recommendations for social workers, there should be 1 in every building, or 1 per every 250 students. It's not a requirement from the state. It's just a recommendation from the Social Worker Association.
Can I also mention, when you were speaking of social workers, I definitely think we need more social workers. I don't know what the ratio or the numbers are. I think that the increase in social workers would help a lot of the situations and problems for all of the kids, and particularly what we're coming out of and going into. But there is a difference in what a social worker sometimes brings to the table.
Oh, I agree.
With especially with minority students, as opposed to someone who may be able to relate to that student differently. I've worked with a lot of social workers, and they are excellent at what they do, but some students, if they may not trust that social worker anymore than they do their teacher. So that's why when we look at the inclusion or the equity or the diversity in it, I think that helps all of them, the students, the teachers.
Let me explain my thought process and why I asked that, because, Rick said he wanted to introduce this position to kind of be a placeholder for the budget, right? But I know that our social workers are greatly overworked, and I know that they do a lot of good. So for me, that's another area that I feel, I'm not saying that they're the same as an equity director. I'm just saying this is another area that I think is really important and that we're going to need next year. And I also feel the same way about our school counselors, because I sat in on the counselor Zoom meeting and I heard, I didn't get to see the whole meeting because I had to go to work, but I heard the Gateway Middle School presenting that they needed a full-time counselor to replace one of the half-times, that they're shorthanded. So I'm just wondering, and based on like Rick's line of thinking, do I need to make a motion tonight to also hire X amount of social workers and X amount of counselors? Because I care about those issues equally, and I want to make sure that there's a spot in the budget for those. And if so, how many do I recommend, that we hire? Because we haven't had the meeting yet. It's June 1st, but I don't want those to get slighted either, because I think that these are all important issues. So maybe I should make a motion tonight to hire 3 social workers and 2 counselors?
Framework person.
What?
A student success framework, what's the name? It's not a director, it's a.
Well, do you see my line of thinking? Do you see why I'm struggling with this? Because those are very
saying.
important to me.
And
As is equity, as is tutors.
Yeah.
Like, we might be needing tutors to help our kids with our loss that we don't know what it is yet, and we're really not going to know it until the fall, but we're going to have to make a decision in June on our budget, but we don't have the data and we don't know exactly what the needs are. So I'm really going to trust Guy and Dennis and Bill to have worked with some estimates and try to come up with a plan, a comprehensive plan based on maybe some estimates, but also, we have limited funds. So how do we placehold for all of those other significant positions? How do we do that?
Could I make a suggestion and ask our
Can somebody answer
administrators?
that question?
Pardon me?
Can you answer that question?
No, but I was going to ask our administrators for their recommendation at the next meeting. What their thought,
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, you know what the needs are.
Can I,
Go ahead, Rick.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean, it's difficult to tell if you're done over the phone, but I apologize for cutting you off.
No, I talk an awful lot. I'm sorry.
And I just wanted to touch on something that Mary Beth said. You're pointing to limited funds, and I agree. I think we need to be fiscally responsible and protect the taxpayer dollar. Mr. Schott, how much is currently on this agenda tonight for artificial grass and turfing our athletic fields? Roughly.
I think there's probably about 3.8 covered, but that's all by bond money. It's
right, but it's
we're borrowing money to pay for that. Are you suggesting we borrow money to pay for an equity director if we don't have it in the budget?
I am not. I made no such suggestion. I'm pointing out that when we talk about spending $4 million on turf, nobody bats an eye. We're not having a 45-minute discussion. So if that's really the case, if that's really your objection here, I have to question it.
Honestly, my objection is that you're putting this on the agenda before the meeting. That's what I've said for hours tonight, as to why you're doing this now instead of in June after our meeting. But you
so that we can account for it in the budget. And then,
well, I'm getting tired of having this discussion. It's 10 to 10. I'm sure everybody else is too. So I'm just going to close, and I'm not going to comment anymore. But I would like to make a motion to put on the agenda to hire at least 2 counselors and 2 more social workers. Just because I want to hold them in the place for the budget, because I know that they're going to be in there in some fashion. I don't know how, but I think they're all important, and I want to make sure that they're accounted for as well. Bonnie, did you get that?
I got it.
have to vote on.
I am not going to second that. It's a good idea. I'm not ready to second it.
Rick, we can't hear you.
You're breaking up.
You still there, Mr. McIntyre?
I can make a resolution for you seconded.
So that's what you're doing, is making a resolution on it.
Yeah.
Proposing resolution, good, that's
Yeah,
good.
just a board member resolution
All
for
right, listen,
consideration for
I
next
just want,
week.
I just
I just
want
want it
to.
on there now so that it can be on there for next week.
Brian, this came up a couple times. I just want to say a quick word about data or the absence of data. Data can be right, wrong, incorrect, outdated, or premature. We could have the presence or absence of data, and we still need to do something or be something. So data itself is not enough. A person who has wisdom, knowledge, understanding, vision, discernment, shrewdness, foresight, and experience can sometimes do great things, even when the data is wrong or absent or premature. So that's who we have here. We have some administrators, Dr. Rossi, Dr. Chapin, Dr. Short, who don't have all the data yet, and yet they're required to do something good for the district and for the students. And so I'm not going to wait for the data. I'm going to listen to your recommendations, even in the absence of data. That's all I have to say.
All right. I think for sake of time, even though we could talk about this all night, we're going to have to put an end to this. We do have a week as well before it shows up again for our regular meeting. So if any board members have any questions, please reach out to your fellow board members, administration, to get those answered. We're going to jump to number 2, which is Ms. Warnings.
Yes, this is just a follow-up from our guest speaker tonight. It's approval of memorandum of understanding with Vision to Learn for Student Vision Services to approve the MOU with Vision to Learn for Students Vision Services beginning with the 2001-2022 fiscal year and remaining in effect for subsequent fiscal years unless terminated by either party as depicted in Exhibit J. The district will not incur any direct or indirect expenditures as a result of the approval of this MOU with Vision to Learn. And that is all I have.
All right. Anyway, the presentation had a lot of information. Does anybody have any last minute questions on this one?
All
right. Perfect. Yeah, we're going to skip all the reports. So motion to adjourn. Mr. Rushi, second. Second. Mr. Williams. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Adjourn.
What did you get?